but I think I'll answer it right now with like mindset is like no pain, no gain, NO pain, NO gain. Shifting that mindset or at least having another side of that, like to KNOW. Because I think like it's impossible to be successful or a better athlete or have a better body without pain. Like there's no way. You need to push reps and you need to push your training and you need to endure pain to get stronger. But also that's not the only side of it. There's other fundamentals as well.
Welcome to Iron Summit, where we cover topics about health, fitness, and general performance through the eyes of former elite Division I wrestlers.
Now, because he can't bench.
Oh, you can't bench right now?
So I tried to start the podcast to get Ryan complimenting me. Missed it by like
a little late.
Yeah.
Are you dealing with an injury right now?
I tore my pec.
Ooh. Wow.
He was just benching like a casual 500 pounds, but whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
I had it repaired, but no, actually, Ryan, I did my first dumbbell press last Friday.
Yeah.
Did some more yesterday.
Okay.
At 7 weeks out and then like 7.5 weeks out. So,
all right. Well,
I mean, I'm sure we'll get into why movement is king.
Yeah,
but
for sure. So no stranger to injury for you.
No.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, all right. Jumping into it, getting on that new podcast here. We got the co-founder of Whealth, with kind of a funny background. You got a degree in industrial and systems engineering from USC, and then, came into this fitness background. So Cam Borch, how you doing? And how'd you get into, what you're currently doing from such a diverse engineering background to fitness?
Yeah. Well, I never intended to be doing this, what I'm doing, career and fitness and that sort of thing. So yeah, I did study industrial and systems engineering at USC. But my junior year of college, I sustained a life-changing injury. Literally it was life-changing. I think most people never really anticipate, maybe Max, I don't know. I guess benching 500, maybe you're more aware that, I could tear my pec, but I'm sure you didn't really expect that. For me, I had a back injury, a disc herniation when I was 21 years old. And that really flipped my world upside down at the time, coming from really competitive swimming. And then I got into CrossFit and bodybuilding and all that sort of thing. Probably like you guys, fitness was definitely my identity at that time. And I just started, I won't go too far into it because I could talk about that for a minute, but I started feeling like over my sophomore summer, started having really bad back spasms for months. And I just had no idea what was going on. And that was, during that summer I was traveling and I was like staying inside while my family was traveling. We went overseas. I couldn't sit on the airplane. It was a whole mess. And it was such a mystery to me. I couldn't figure out why my back and body was locking. And then probably like a month later, around my 21st birthday, I stepped off a curb and my back buckled and, we had a car ride back home, and long story short, woke up, a few weeks later with just this burning sensation down my leg. Have either of you guys dealt with disc stuff? Any back pain?
A little bit,
okay.
not that severe.
Okay. Yeah. So
yeah,
I don't wish that upon anyone. At the time I had no idea, again, still what was going on. I just had this horrible pain down my left leg and I couldn't flex my right leg or my left leg at all. I had very little hip flexion, couldn't bend over, couldn't put on my shoes. I had to do a push-up to get out of bed. Everything, couldn't sit on the toilet. Obviously it goes without saying, I probably had to stop lifting. So I was trying to find some answers there. Went to one of the best chiropractors in Northern California and PT and, acupuncture and decompression, like tried a lot of different things to kind of figure out what it was. Got an MRI, X-ray, was told I had a disc herniation, the L5S1, which is the lowest disc. And that was really scary at the time because I hadn't heard, my impression was disc injuries are for older people, 60, 70, 80-year-olds, and I was like, wow, I'm 21 years old. And I think what was really difficult for me at that time too was being such an actionable person and loving fitness and like going to try to find help from PTs and chiros and doctors. And um, instead of feeling like I was being built back up, it felt like I was being broken down even more. Like they were kind of looking at me like I was fragile and my MRI was just absolutely messed up and I was never going to heal. Um, so that was really tough because I was already dealing with, about half a year of really intense pain and then kind of the psychological pain of hoping that someone should be looking out for you with some like really impressive credentials just kind of tells you like, you're not going to get better. Told me a lot of negative things. I'd never squat, never deadlift again. My back was just jacked up. I needed to go to a chiropractor for the rest of my life. At the time, too, I was wearing a back brace. That was what the chiropractor and PT recommended to me. And it was like
Wow.
so mystifying. I was like, why am I wearing a back brace right now? Like, why can't I, control and have this strength myself? Um, but I know a lot of people don't have that negative of an experience with medical system, with PT, chiro, that sort of thing. So I don't want to overgeneralize and say everyone's like that. But for me, actually having that negative experience was such a positive thing for me because I think I needed that fire to be lit inside me for someone to tell me like you're never gonna do squat or deadlift or lift again, to go ahead and like redirect myself. So um, at that time, I found my co-founder Andrew online on Instagram, and he had gone through like an L5S1 or L4 L5 herniation. Found him off Instagram, went through his online program, and it got me out of pain within a few months. And that's kind of where that life changing thing came in. Like studying engineering, not being able to go to class because my back hurts, doing this like random online rehab program in my fraternity room, getting out of pain. And also at the time seeing literally, they had like a Facebook group where they were coaching people. I saw thousands of people do the program and have incredible results. I mean, you have people avoiding surgeries, people post op, people who are suicidal, people who are addicted to medication, all sorts of things where people are just lost and then like find hope through what feels like a pretty common sense rehab approach. So I was like, I want to like dedicate my life towards helping other people who are in pain find an empowering solution. So I went to go work for him, after college. And then few years, I guess we're coming up on our 4-year anniversary. Some things happened at the past company that I won't dive into, which was good because now I'm a co-founder of Whealth with Katie and Andrew. We have another coach, we have a videographer. So a small, lean team, but we're pretty much doing the same thing. So that's
That's
how
awesome.
I ended up with doing what I'm doing right now. I had, no intention of doing that.
That's such a cool story. I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
One is was it an acute injury, your herniation, or was it something that like you just kind of noticed over time? Do you think it was stepping off that curve?
Uh, I,
Was it
I
a
mean,
lifting incident?
I feel like that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I think it's really hard to tell. I think for you, obviously, you're like, yeah, my pec tore when I
Yeah.
was in that load, right? I did not feel like I felt a pop, stepping off a curb, but I'm like, okay, I've done way more like lifting, way more reps in CrossFit of heavier weight and plyometrics and stuff like that to where like I don't think that was what injured me. That was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. For me, I haven't really identified what it was. I feel like I just have a lot of different themes potentially that kind of contributed to that load over time in that area, but it's kind of hard to say. Um, I would say it's probably more systemic of how I was personally moving and my weaknesses and lack of intention, lack of awareness within the body for me.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder what, like, you kind of touched on a little bit with the chiropractor stuff, and
Mhm.
doctor stuff, but what are your thoughts on that? What were they having you do? Because I'm with you. Like, I have mixed feelings about chiropractors. Like, sometimes I think they're super helpful, and some I'm like, I don't know, man. They crack your back, you feel good for 20 minutes, and then the problem's just there always after that. So yeah, what was your experience? I guess a little bit more in depth with what they were telling you to do and why it was wrong for your situation.
Yeah, I think in general, like the difference between passive and active approaches for healing, I don't think you can control everything. Like, and I don't think that's the point of life is to be pain free, is to not have challenge, to not have injury, to control everything in your future. I don't think that's realistic. But I think there is an element of like, there are so many things we can control with our health. And I think generally speaking, like a lot of chiropractic and medical stuff, and even kind of some PT stuff, it focuses a lot on passive intervention. So like I would categorize passive as like medication or just adjustments or like something that someone else is just doing to you, but you're not actually putting in work. So like, hey, Ryan, come here and I'm going to throw you on like the decompression table, or I'm going to give you a massage or acupuncture, um, injections, electric stim, like all of these things that I think we probably spend a lot of time and money and resources into the development of technology to try to help heal specific injuries. And I think it's a convenient kind of sale in that system in which you show up and someone else is just going to make you better. But from my perspective, we can't expect people to actually feel better if we're not addressing the things that they're doing with their nutrition, with their movement before they got in the door. So I think I think that problem happens because a lot of clients probably don't want to do the rehab work because that's not fun. But also, I think there are a lot of people who want to get better. They want to put in the work, but if they go and are met kind of with, just professionals who are like, hey, there's nothing you can do, like, except for come see me and I'm going to put my hands on you and I'm going to adjust you and manipulate you and you don't have to do anything. I think that's just wrong. And it's also not realistic to get better. So for me, what I was being told to do was a lot of don't do stuff. So like never lift again, never row again. The rowing machine's bad for your back. Don't load your back. Don't flex your back. Rest and ice. Go and see my buddy who's a chiropractor in LA. Once you stop seeing me in NorCal, you're going to see him 2 times a week for a few months. And if you're lucky, you're going to get healed. It was just kind of a lot of this, like you're dependent on other people and other things. And when I was like, okay, so if you need me to decompress my spine, why is it compressed? Like, what does that mean? Can I alter the load in my body? And it's like, I knew inherently, I was like, okay, just take building, for example. You pick specific exercises with specific intention to produce specific force to muscles and joints, and we physically see them grow and get stronger. So why does that logic not apply to the back? Like, don't I have some control in how I move? I was asking this guy these questions. He's just like, no, it's all bad. Like you just have to ice and whatever medication. And I was like super against medication injections. I never want to do surgery. So for me, again, I know that's probably kind of painting some of them in a bad light. And I know that's not how it is because I know there's a lot of sports chiropractors who are like, hey, you can come and get adjusted. And also, by the way, this is not going to fix it. We need to do these other things. I feel like I'm fortunate that I had, again, a really negative experience with like being told that I'm never going to get better by someone. And that kind of fired me up to like go find something else.
That's awesome. I want to get into kind of exactly like the specific program with Wealth.
Yeah.
But I do think, and it's the start of it. I'm sure you guys are part of the movement, but even with like orthopedic procedures, all the best, most forward looking and thinking doctors, like we're starting to see movement is super important for recovery. So like, I mean, my pec repair, traditionally you would be getting out of the sling at 6 weeks.
Right.
I had been doing like isometric contractions. I was benching dumbbells at 7 weeks.
Yeah. That's
like
awesome.
full range of motion back. Like, so I think we're starting to move, but you got to kind of look for it like you did.
Yeah, for sure.
You got to find the right people, but
yeah, like the rice, rest, ice, compression, elevation. Like,
yeah, it turns out
don't
ice
do
is
that.
like not good for anything.
You don't need to be icing for like, I've talked to people on the phone who I'm trying to get in the program. Like, dude, you've been icing your back for a year. Like that's acute stage. We got to get movement in it.
Yeah. That's like acute stage only if you have so much inflammation, you can't control it. That's like now, but that was like the train of thought.
Right. Yeah.
So
crazy.
So what about like, I mean, there's the great thing about the internet is like, there's a wealth of knowledge for everyone. But like, I think the hard part is filtering through the good and bad advice. So how'd you find Andrew? How'd you figure out what worked? Cause obviously, I mean, I think it's awesome. You took it into your own hands. You're like, listen, I'm going to figure this out. And you did your own research. But I'm sure
Mhm.
that was a process, and you didn't just like, and maybe you did, but you probably didn't just find Andrew and be like, oh, first try, figured out the right thing to fix my back that nobody could figure out.
Right. Yeah, I think, dude, I feel like I just got blessed by coming across his page super quick. I was following a bunch of fitness guys at the time, like Marcus Philly, and I was asking like people at the gym. That's actually how I kind of got plugged into like this chiropractor who, honestly, I hated that experience.
Yep.
So that was just a recommendation that didn't fit well with me. I feel like I was super blessed, and I was following. They're called Move You at the time, but I DM'd them and they responded and just like, oh yeah, I pretty much sent one of those hopeless DMs to this big account, and they responded and were super encouraging. And then I hopped on a webinar, and then Andrew was actually on that webinar talking about how he dealt with a disc herniation, in 2013, and had gone through it and was back to deadlifting and squatting and doing CrossFit. And I just bit at that story. Like, I didn't even know what I was really even getting myself into, to be honest. My mom actually bought the program for me on my 21st birthday because I didn't have $700 to spend. I was like, Mom, I really want to do this program. Like, this guy, healed the same injury that I have and has this online program. I don't even remember knowing what I was really getting into other than buying the story. And like, thankfully, my mom had some cash to throw, and she's like, okay, if you think it's going to be better. Cause I had already spent like my parents had already spent like a few $1,000s within, a few weeks for like out of pocket, PT and massage and decompression. Like, dude, those appointments start spending money so fast. So it was
Mhm.
kind of, fortunately, had the budget to do that at that time. And it's kind of crazy looking back, like that $700 I spent, like looking back on that, if I knew what I was going to get, I would have done anything to get more money there. Cause it just, with that, it was a ton of information laid out on how to rehab, how to like look at your body in a holistic way from the ground up. Like, I had no idea what anything in my body was doing. I thought I was, moving well. Um, and then that practice and then what you learn, I think like before you get injured, and I'm sure for you, Max, it looks like you're lifting some super heavy weight. If all that was required, and same, with you, Ryan, like if all that was required for athletes to get better at a sport was just try harder and endure more pain, like everyone would be, not everyone, but I would be so much better at running, and people would be so much better at every sport because like there's a certain type of pain like that I like to endure. I like to run fast and I like to do this. What some people don't like to do is work on the recovery, and they don't want to work on the mobility and the other hard things that are like a different type of hard, or mechanics. And I realized, coming from, my swimming and fitness background, I loved pain. Like, that was what made me a great swimmer. I was willing to just endure more than someone else in the 200 and 500 free. So it'd be anywhere from like a minute 45 to 4.5, 5 minute threshold. And I would just play games with people. Like, I could always endure that pain. That's what got me good at CrossFit. But I realized, like, after I got injured, I was like, dang, that was the only thing I was doing in the gym, was just seeing lifts from like pick up the bar and put it down. It's like, no, there's so much more and going on with that. And I think that's, another problem as well. People just have no control or awareness of what is even going on
Yeah.
with their body.
That's I love that point. So take us through like what your rehab looked like for your back,
Yeah.
just from a high level, and then
Yeah.
a little bit just for everyone what the well kind of system is.
Yeah, for sure. So, um, I think what seemed radical at the time, but not radical to me, but definitely radical towards how, common PT would be. And you can take this example for, I think, a lot of different injuries. Like, for you, you tear your pec. So there's a lot of isolation that goes in that. It's definitely an acute issue, but I think like for you in the recovery, you're not just going to want to work on the pec. You're going to want to understand the dynamics of the rib cage and the scapula and all those things, because those things can kind of get thrown off, throughout an injury. And then when it's a chronic injury, say like you were dealing with some sort of, pec thing for years and you had no idea about it. And then you're trying to rehab and you're only trying to rehab just by looking at the pec and the lat or the pec and the scap, but you don't understand like how those imbalances have almost shifted throughout the entire body. That's where, especially for kind of chronic stuff, it's really important to be looking at the entire body. So, and I think whether or not it's acute or chronic, I mean, most people could benefit from like a full body rehab program. So for me, that was what was super insightful with going through, Andrew's first program. And what we teach is like, hey, most people do tend to come to us for a lot of back pain. And that's kind of because of the marketing story that we tell, and people resonate with the fact that we've been through that. But like where traditional PT would be like, okay, you have back pain, let's just work on the core and glutes and hips. Like, here's the isolated area. This is what we're going to do. We're like, yeah, it's really important to work on that area, but it's also important to understand how the rib cage affects the pelvis and how the hips affect the pelvis and how the knee affects the pelvis and how the feet affects the pelvis. So long story short, our approach and the approach that I went through, you spend a few weeks kind of understanding like how each joint in the body moves, every single one, left to right, what, shoulders, scaps, wrists, elbows, knees, like how they can rotate, how they can flex, extend, move around. Spend a little bit of time kind of going through fundamental range of motion, mobility, and strengthening for joints on an individual basis, but then you kind of start to branch that out. And then, do limb specific stuff, lower body, upper body, full body. So it really will have you do like a lot of specific work towards that body, but also getting the other, body parts surrounding the injured area to kind of be able to get strong, disperse some of the load, be able to take over. Cause that was one thing that I realized that was really insightful for me was everything I was doing with lifting was just driving through my low back. And I think a lot of times you'll say like, hey, if you have a disc herniation or a back injury, like just develop a strong back. It's like, yes, but what if everything you're doing is through your low back and you think you're extending through your hips, but all you're doing is extending through the lumbar? Like, it's great that your lumbar is really strong, but also like, let's have the hip do the job of a hip as well. So I think that's also kind of a mismatch as well. A lot of people, again, have no idea how they're moving. They're not aware that like the rest of the body can kind of disperse load. So through our rehab approach as well, it's like, if we're going to have you do a specific hip exercise, you better be certain that we're doing it with the hip. So like the intention of that exercise matters. Because I think a lot of rehab as well is like, okay, we're going to give so-and-so a piece of paper. They're going to do these 5 exercises, and the exercise is just going to have a picture of how to do it. It's like, okay, calling a squat, just because I'm calling a squat doesn't mean you're really squatting. You could be hinging and calling it a squat, right? So pairing like actual, and this is, kind of getting deeper into it, but pairing actual exercises with how you're doing it is what matters as well.
So how do you, I guess to me, and I'm going to use like in a wrestling example, just because I don't know,
Yeah.
it's probably the easiest way I think about this, but like, so if you got somebody from birth where you're molding them and shaping them and giving them perfect movement patterns, super easy, right? Because there's no like bad habits to unlearn. But like in wrestling, if you drill a shot a certain way, 10,000 times, and then somebody goes, "Hey man, your foot's in the wrong spot here."
Right.
And so how long does it typically take you guys to like relearn somebody's motor patterns? Because I'm sure that's frustrating, especially you get somebody 40, 50 years old that's been doing this their whole life, and you're like, "Hey,
Yeah.
actually, this is putting all this load on your low back."
Hmm.
How so what's your yeah, how do you guys go through
Yeah.
something like that in reteaching a motor pattern? Because I think you're right, there's a huge foundation that's super important, and I think that's why, like, a strength coach for, like,
Hmm.
a younger sports, like, is super important to make sure that they're getting that foundation.
Yeah. I think few ways to address that question. You could look at that as a good and bad thing, right? Yeah, you've drilled something 1,000 times in maybe a less um, beneficial way, but you're also now an athlete that knows how to pick up skills faster than someone else. So I think what I would start with anyone dealing with an injury or trying to relearn movement patterns is like, hey, you're gonna be okay. You're not broken. You're not unfixable. The body is super resilient. So like inadaptable, the way in which we kind of got in this situation, like let's take a step back and realize, hey, we're not going to fix everything overnight. Okay, are we good with that? It might take a few weeks or a few months to relearn these things, but we can do that, right? So I think that's part of it is kind of setting the stage with rehab or learning new skills. Like it does take time, and sometimes that's okay. I don't think the goal is by any means to be perfectly symmetrical, and I wouldn't take back, like if I look at how I used to swim, I swam for 10 years every single day, and I would always breathe on one side, so I would always open up to this one side for thousands and thousands and thousands of strokes. Played baseball, played water polo. It's like, okay, I'm right side dominant. So I just like any other human being, you try to throw a ball with your left hand and it feels ridiculous, right? That is part of life. Like that's part of athletics. I don't think anyone's saying like being the best in an athletic sport is the healthiest, but it's something that we kind of have cost benefit analysis and we like to do that, right? So I think just being realistic with like, hey, I love my sport. I love kind of doing specific things. What can I do on the side to address it? Um, so I guess your question was like, how long does it take to, address those
Mhm.
things? Like, I don't know. I think sometimes it just depends. Weeks, months, potentially years. I mean, I guess it's like, I'm looking back on it. I've been lifting for, 10 plus years. And I feel like maybe really serious about biomechanics and movement now for 7. And like the more serious you get about it, the more in tune with your body you are. And the more you realize you are like imbalanced, so it's
Yeah.
kind of this curse. It's like, the better I get at it, then I'm like, "Oh my gosh, my right foot doesn't pronate like my left one, and my right hip is like stuck in external rotation." It's like, okay, the common person doesn't really need to know that. We just kind of need to get
It's
better. And if you cut us open all the way down the body, we're not symmetrical. So I think it's like just balancing that. We're gonna be okay if we're imbalanced, but also, working on the side to do unilateral rotational stuff and be cognizant of that.
it's the Dunning-Kruger
Yeah.
effect. You think you
Yeah.
know the most when you know like 30% about something.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's probably like a lifelong, once you really get into it, it's a lifelong journey on just being as mobile and healthy as you can.
Yeah.
I have some so when you talk about like strengthening, whether it's for lower back
Mhm.
injury and you're strengthening from the ground up or from the rib cage down,
Mhm.
when you say strength, is that strengthening musculature? Is that strengthening soft tissue? Is it both?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what strengthening means or improving mobility? Kind of
Yeah.
a little bit more of the meathead mechanics or
Yeah, for sure.
specific mechanics behind that.
Yeah, I think, like, when it comes to, a joint, like, if you look at the back, you have what is it? 5 in the lumbar, and then I think 11 in thoracic and C7, so 5, 7, 11. What is that? 18 joints? Um, or no, 5, 7,
12,
12.
5 plus 7,
Yeah.
12
23.
plus
23,
11, 23.
right?
There we go,
So,
Ryan.
there's a lot of different ways in which, right? I was like on the spot with the math. A lot of different ways in which like the spine
All
can
good.
move, right? And I think if you look at a joint, if it's there, like it probably should have that ability to move. And I think that's important to expose, the spine into flexion, extension, and rotation. I think it's really important to hit that sort of thing. And then I'll also train the spine in which like I am purposely keeping the rib cage stacked over the core and then really kind of keeping that locked in and then hitting the surrounding musculature as well and kind of stabilizing in an isometric way. So, I mean, the way that I look at joints now is like, hey, if it's got some range of motion to hit, why not expose it to kind of all sides of that? Whereas, like, some conventional PTs, like, don't ever round your back. It's like, okay, that's not going to be helpful. But also, if someone has sciatica or like disc pain, like I did, it was like, dude, I had to be so careful about how much I was going into flexion extension and working with that. Right. So that's kind of like that graded exposure. Um, so yeah, I mean, for me currently what I'm doing, like I will do loaded flexion and extension and just kind of work that up. I think for me, that's probably my weakest point simply because it took a while to get over the fear of that post injury. I had to like actually get out of pain and be like, well, okay, I'm good. But then also like almost fight these narratives in my mind, like you're never going to squat or deadlift again. And I think as a result, those skills have kind of been the slowest to come back just because yeah, there was a lot of fear there. So yeah, I think just
Yeah.
being able to hit it in all different directions and domains, I
Yeah.
think is beneficial.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. It's like the the Jefferson curl, which I see you guys
Yeah.
do a lot of. Like 8 years ago, you ask pretty much anyone, they're like, "That's bad for you."
Mhm. Mhm.
And now there's so much science on like the benefits of putting load on your spine without it being fixed.
Right?
Yeah, like it's crazy that it's changed that much, and
Yeah.
it makes sense. Like intuitively, we were just not sure why we got on that path
Ye
of like fixed spine.
Dude, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just like, again, I still don't know the exact answer to that because I think if you take someone in that very quick instance of back pain and those movements are very irritating to someone, like, naturally, be like, "Hey, don't do that. That's bad for you. That's not gonna help out." But I think there's not nuance in the conversation, and you also have people who study medicine and prescribe that telling you how to move. And, like, for instance, the chiro there, I'm like, "This dude doesn't like to lift, doesn't wanna lift, is not supporting my goals." So he's like, "Oh, yeah, don't squat and deadlift. It's, like, bad for your back and your knees." It's like, rather than just blanket statement throwing that into the rehab ether, it's like, rather than say, "Hey, it's bad or it's good," be like, "Well, what about how I do that?" What does that even mean? How do I influence that load? And I think that's really, again, what it comes down to. You can't just blanket statement say one thing is bad or good. It might be bad or like bad or good for an individual at that time in their recovery. But I understand too, where like if you're dealing with a ton of people, you're going to be able to have that nuanced conversation, or is it just more beneficial to just say, don't do this and do that? So I think it just
Yeah.
takes nuance. It takes
I
medical
love this.
professionals probably wanting to be fit and active and understanding that. But sometimes there's a mismatch there as well.
So how often are you in a typical week now,
Yeah.
kind of finding this out, fixing your back? Like, how often are you continuing to work on these types of things? Or is it back to
Yeah.
normal training until, your body starts barking at you a little bit again, and then you're like, "All right, I gotta go back and fix something else going on."
Yeah. Um, Man, knock on wood. I have my computer on top of my Rogue box right now, so just knock on some wood. I haven't had a sciatica for like 6.5 years, so I
Nice.
don't feel like anymore there's anything I have to fix. But that being said, have you guys heard of FRC?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
that's like what I've used to
Yeah.
rehab my back. Is I'm working with an FRC
Okay.
specialist.
Yeah. And I don't think FRC is everything. But again,
Yeah, it's a great
yeah,
system.
it's a great system, and
The
there's
system.
exactly, there's a lot of great systems. But like, what they'll say with the cars routine is like, it's kind of like flossing. It's like, hey, if you want to have good teeth and oral hygiene, like you got to brush and floss every single day. And I think there's something to be said about that for your joints. Like if you don't use it, you lose it. So like, I don't feel like I'm fixing an injury, rather, again, like, and I don't do cars every single day. I would say, probably like 3 days a week, I probably hit every joint with some sort of controlled articular rotation throughout my workout. So it's not like I have just pure strength meathead days and then pure like mobility days. It's like I kind of mix it all in together. And I have a coach who programs for me. So it's like I do 2 upper body days a week, 2 lower body days a week, and then I'll do like a plyo, like athletic day, which is like so pathetic coming from someone who used to swim. Like you should see me try to hop. It's atrocious. But just building some of that, resiliency because I like running. And then I'll have like one kind of free flow, like hip and core day. So within that, it's like I lift heavy. I do a lot of well, not heavy compared to you guys, but like I'll do bilateral stuff. I'll do a lot of unilateral stuff. I'll do a lot of rotational stuff. That's kind of like PRI, FRC related, traditional strength and conditioning stuff. And then I also just kind of start to look at, weightlifting exercises with a little bit of load. Like, hey, can I allow this load to pull me into a deeper stretch position and hold that, or kind of create some force there? And try to get some mobility stuff knocked out with my weight training all at the same time, and you kind of see
Yeah,
that with a lot of the stuff like ATG. And there's this big kind of now overshift towards like, we're going to just max out all of these ranges of motion and hold it with weight at the end. And we're going to do mobility work. I think FRC would probably say like, that's not true mobility work. Who really knows anymore,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, actually, I had this discussion with my pec rehab specialist this morning,
Yeah.
he's an FRC practitioner,
Mhm.
but he's very practical. But it's like, yeah, if you max out your range of motion on a hack squat, you are maxing out the range of motion for a hack squat, but that's not maxing out the range of motion for your knee joint. Is it good and beneficial for you to do the full range of motion there? Is it going to cause more
Sure.
muscle growth? Yes and yes, but it's also like you also need to be doing some supplemental work with
Yeah.
like FRC.
Yeah.
FRC is a system for specifically training end ranges of motions. Like
Yes.
whether it's FRC or any other method, you should be doing something there to keep your tissue healthy.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. I do really appreciate that lens about FRC, because if we think about it, I'm looking at my squat rack right now. It's like we develop equipment and moves essentially to like just exercise during the day, which is kind of funny, you know, like you go into a space and you lift weights in a specific domain, but there's so many different ways in which you can move as well. Like we could very well be, you know, on a different planet doing different moves that don't even look like a deadlift or a squat or whatever. So I understand that's kind of what FRC is saying is like, hey, if we just squat and deadlift and bench bilaterally, we're only going to hit specific ranges of motion, but there's going to be a difference in which we pull our hip up here and then work on the pale and the rail and the rotation. Like you're not going to hit that unless you're specifically going for that and understanding how that joint can move in space, which is like both fun and not, you know, like sometimes I'm like, oh man, FRC is super boring. And I also I'm tighter. So I feel like I kind of suck at it. And you'll look at a lot of FRC people. I think a lot of them who do FRC potentially might be hypermobile as well, where they have more range and might be a little bit more fun. But also maybe that's just me making excuses for not, you know, gravitating towards
I
what's a
think
little bit more difficult for me.
let's be like doing FRC is nowhere near as fun as like loading the bar up and doing some
For
squats.
sure.
I'd be like, I've convinced myself of the benefits.
Yeah.
And like, yeah. But what's in like FRC is it's a system for training the end ranges, but like what's funny is because before lifting weights was like, oh, it's going to make you tight and
Right.
get hurt. But really it's just like, how do you lift weights? You're training musculature.
Mhm.
It's like these things start to blend together.
Yeah.
Where it's all just about having healthy tissue throughout your whole body.
Definitely. And I can appreciate that. Like, you know, I don't think ATG by any means is holy grail, but like, again, I like doing some of those things and I will incorporate that. It's not the one system that I practice, but I think what they're trying to say is like, hey, it's not FRC of weightlifting, but they're trying to say like, hey, let's kind of start to try to develop these greater ranges. So we're not just only lifting mid range in all of these movements so that we can preserve, you know, some mobility. So I can appreciate that. And I think for some people, it's like, hey, whatever they're going to do is probably going to be better than just sitting on the couch. You know, like in theory, is FRC the best? I don't think so. But even if it were, that might not be helpful for people if they would just rather lift weights than do FRC. You know, it's like, okay, there's going to be a lot of benefit in which someone's going to be consistent with the approach. But also too, you do have to throw in some stuff that's not fun and whether or not you like it, you know, like flossing your teeth is not objectively fun, but we kind of recognize like you just got to do it, you know, don't make excuses about it.
I love the nuance approach you take because I do think it's so much more complicated and everyone's looking for like this perfect whatever. And it's like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yep.
And it's like something's better than nothing. And then somebody like yourself that really enjoys fitness and wants to push their body, like you're going to have to do a lot more stuff to make sure that your body's in alignment and doing the right things than somebody that's like, hey, I just want to walk without pain.
For sure.
So I think that makes a lot of sense too. Like, what are your personal goals? What are you trying to do? And then, you know, kind of finding things around that makes sense for you and trying to make those movement patterns work the best to your ability with that.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, is that a question?
Yeah.
What are my current goals right now?
That is a great question that we could lead into. Yeah, I'd love to hear kind of what your
I didn't know if it's lagging or whatever on my end. I wasn't sure if that was a question or okay. Yeah, you were just reiterating.
So what are your current goals? I mean, I know you talked a little bit about 2 upper, 2 lower, but
Sure.
Obviously you're an athlete, you're a meathead, you're, you know, trying to stay healthy. What do you see, you know, your long-term fitness goals, I guess, next 5, 10, 15 years?
Man, I would love to get back into running. I
So
went
would
out pretty.
Max, by the way.
Yeah.
Max is going to run a
Yeah.
marathon.
I'll get into, I'm actually starting next week sprinting,
Okay.
not going to long distance.
Dude, he's into that. So I'm still right now. I'm navigating a little hip injury. I ran a marathon last year and
Nice.
I loved it, which was kind of funny. I'm like probably at the time I was like 205. I feel like I was getting maybe like solidifying a little niche for myself. Maybe one of the better runners out in the races at over 200 pounds. So that was kind of fun. And then this year I ran a half marathon and I pushed it with like a guy who ran in college. And I think that kind of tore me through a little bit. So I think I kind of strained a little hip flexor thing or something, which I'm navigating. So that would be my goal, would be to get back into it. And it's kind of funny because it was like, I've dealt with injuries and, okay, got to listen to pain and this and that. And I let my ego get the best of me before the race, and I did not listen, and I really
We've all been
left
there.
it out on the course and dealing with the
Oh, yeah.
repercussions. Honestly, a few months later, so it's still a learning process. So I'm kind of in that rehab stage, back in that. Pain's at like a 1 to 2 on the hip, so it's getting better, readapting the range of motion. Um, so yeah, that's honestly my goal. I'd love to get back to running. Like we developed a
Yeah.
running club down here in San Diego and was doing it all the time and finally having it be social. And then, now I'm back on the sidelines right now. So currently that's my goal. Functional little meathead, be able to have that competitive edge. Right now I don't really look at the barbell and be like, oh, I can't wait to put on 5 pounds to my lift. Like that's just right now. I don't really feel like that, but running was kind of starting to be like that for me. It was giving me that competitive edge, and like coming from a swimming background, I have a really good cardiovascular base. Like to run a sub 440 mile next year, ideally, and then get
Nice.
down to like low 120s for half marathon. And my ultimate goal is to break 3 hours in the marathon this year, but I had to back out.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's fast. I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, right.
Ryan, for context, Ryan's been trying to publicly pressure me to run a marathon,
Hold on.
which I
Let's go.
personally have zero
Con-
interest in doing.
Context before that is Max is like, why don't you put on 20 pounds of
Ryan's
muscle? I was like, yeah, if you drop 20 pounds of muscle and run a marathon. So it was like, it wasn't unscripted that Max needed to run a marathon.
Right. Yeah.
But no, that's awesome. So do you swim at all?
Ryan and I have beat that one out.
No, I haven't swam since, like laps. I haven't really swam since college.
Do you think that had
Not
something to do
just,
with your back injury, like not having non-weight bearing for a lot of your exercise throughout the years, and then kind of getting into more weight bearing stuff where maybe your body wasn't as used to that type of movement?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I think so I do sales for my company and I talk to hundreds of people a month on the phone, and it's like so and so hasn't lifted, they're in pain. People have been lifting forever and they're in pain. They have experience with running or they don't have experience with running and they're in pain. I think inevitably like pain and injury hits people at some point in their life. And I definitely think like the more aware you are with your body and strengthening and whatnot, the more you can mitigate it. But I think, injury is part of life. I don't think the mass suffering that people deal with medication and like being told that they can never do stuff again, I don't think that should be part of life, but it just kind of is. So, it's kind of hearsay to think like, okay, did I get injured because I didn't do land sports growing up? Potentially. I do know for sure, like that swimming structure has absolutely affected the range of motion with my hips and like coordination on specific land exercises and whatnot. Like I can't really remember squatting at all in any point of my life until I was like 16, 17. So I do feel like I probably lost some range of motion there. And like my hips are definitely like public enemy number one. I freaking hate like that work squatting. Like I still need to get that narrative out of my mind. Like, yeah, you hate it because you suck at it. You need to keep doing it. But I would say like, if that's one area that's still tight and my body just feels tight all the time, it's definitely the hips. And looking back on it, it's like, okay, I was just doing flutter kicks like this for years. Yeah, I was playing water polo and you kind of get that egg eater stuff. But again, kind of like FRC would say, like if you're not opening up into those ranges of motion, you can potentially lose that. So maybe that's kind of why. And then as a result, if you don't really have hips that are functioning as hips, going to CrossFit, right after college, I had no idea what I was doing. So I was like, okay, well, squats don't feel good. So I'm going to throw on knee sleeves. I'm going to throw on on one of the lifting belts, and I'm going to throw on, Romalios or the lifted shoes. And like, that's going to kind of help me resemble a squat. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, everyone's got different genetics. Everyone's got a different body structure that influences your biomechanics, but it's like, rather than just kind of blame that, it's like, okay, this is how my body moves now. So what can I do about it? And there's a lot of things now that I know how to move better and work with what I have.
Yeah. I think you just made a great commercial for like why kids should play many sports growing up instead of specializing so young. I
Sure.
wonder if we have more injuries coming up because kids specialize so young now. And I know, especially in college, I'm curious, Max, if you felt this too, but like we'd always play handball to warm up. And you could tell the guys on the team that just wrestled and had zero athletic skills outside of that, but they're very athletic in wrestling. And then the guys that were like, okay, he could go, throw a football, kick a soccer ball, and be an athlete in just about any sport. So it's
For
funny
sure.
to see that in real time. And I wonder,
Yeah,
like you're saying, if you develop those from a young age, if it helps you a lot more as you, continue to grow and become, more mature athlete.
yeah. I think I hear people say swimming is a really good one to do when you're younger. I think any sort of one where like you're going to build a good cardiovascular base. I hear a lot of times people are like, oh, I wish my kids, or I'm definitely going to put them in a gymnastics, like giving them that kinesthetic awareness of where they are in space, I think is really cool. And that might be something that gymnastics potentially does better than other sports, is really like you have to identify where your body is in space. And I think that process of that kinesthetic awareness can allow you to, if you need to rehab later on, or you're trying to get better at a sport, potentially can kind of help you learn and pick up skills faster.
By that logic, by both your logics, wrestling should be one of the best because you have a ton of kinesthetic awareness and someone else is trying to manipulate your body.
Sure.
But to Ryan's point, I've seen a lot of wrestlers who have very little athleticism who are excellent wrestlers, but it also depends how you define athleticism. If you're talking
Yeah.
like hand-eye coordination,
Sure.
yeah, wrestlers suck at that, but like kinesthetic
Yeah.
awareness and strength and extended positions, wrestlers are really good at.
For sure.
So yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. One thing I do want to ask you, without like giving up the wealth secret
Oh,
sauce,
yeah.
what are like 3 to 5 things that
Mhm.
people could focus on, add into their lifting routines
Yeah.
to start to have better mobility, better strength in these extended positions?
Yeah.
If you had to give like 3 to 5 tips?
Dude, if I even tried to give away the secret sauce, I wouldn't be able to, just because I think like the secret sauce comes in with, like, for our secret sauce, our program that people go through has 120 videos with 56 workouts. So you got to watch them, then you got to implement them. And, it takes months, right? So even I could show anyone the program and it wouldn't be worth anything until they do it. I think that's just the general overall tip, would be like devoting yourself, which I think it's tough. I think it's tough for me to even give this advice because I wouldn't have taken it unless I got injured, because it's kind of like, hey, you should do things that are going to make you more resilient so that you don't get injured and have to go through this. But if you don't know what it's like to be injured or have pain, then you're like, that's just an unforeseen future event that you can't understand the gravity of how that's going to affect your life. So you're like, nah, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Right. So I can give that advice, but I know that I wouldn't have taken it at that time, is like, probably, and I know you're kind of asking maybe drills and whatnot, but I think I'll answer it right now with like mindset is like no pain, no gain, NO pain, NO gain. Shifting that mindset, or at least having another side of that, like to KNOW. Because I think Like it's impossible to be successful or a better athlete or have a better body without pain. Like there's no way. You need to push reps and you need to push your training and you need to endure pain to get stronger. But also that's not the only side of it. There's other fundamentals as well. Like you need to listen to your body and you also need to discern specific signals that your body's sending. And like sometimes there are other types of hard that we should be doing, i.e., like mobility. And if I were to say like FRC, like spending time to do FRC, not necessarily fun, but I think the cars and pails and rails, like for me, that's been really helpful. And what I'll do is like I will superset that. Like for instance, I'll kind of do like a bench pull up and then some sort of like weighted shoulder car triple set. So like that's kind of how I approach my training now because I don't have these overall general injuries. So like spend some time focusing on some of these not so fun mobility things and incorporating that in there in an isolated fashion, I think would be really helpful. And you can kind of take, a car and load it up or a pail and rail and maybe superset that into your training block. And I think that feels really good. Can also give you some time during a superset to rest and then also knock out some mobility stuff. So I would say that probably on an individual tip basis. The second big tip or learning for me was just like really understanding the dynamic between the rib cage and the pelvis and learning how to breathe into that rib cage. Not a sexy thing at all. But like all of the ribs like wrap around the front, you have the lungs under them, and then they'll actually all wrap on the backside. So a lot of times we're not really breathing properly. And as a result, that we don't get air actually into the rib cage. This is something that I see FRC doesn't really talk about, which PRI does, which is pretty cool. Learning how to actually get air and expansion into the lungs under the rib cage. And as a result, that will start to open up space in the ribs, which allows the mid back to move well, which allows the scapula to move well. So I've kind of gone through like a deep dive on rib cage, scapula, breathing. And that out of anything in the past few years has made my upper back aesthetically look the best, like just honestly kind of cool, like lat insertions that start to wrap around the back. Functionally wise, like never having really any pain or tightness in the mid back. And it's starting to make even my hips feel better, just having that ability to rotate through the T-spine. And again, like I recognize I'm saying that. And it's like, okay, how do you even boil that down? Like secret sauce is like, hey, start to work on your breathing and pelvis and rib cage.
We,
Like,
we actually
Those
had
are awesome.
this year we had one of our, he was actually a sports psych, but I was coaching at Stanford the last 2 years, and he came in and was talking a lot about breathing.
yeah,
And our trainer had a course too that they were talking about breathing while you're competing. Because a lot of people, especially in wrestling,
Yeah.
like as you're like trying to create force, you hold your breath. And
Yeah.
then obviously, and like your endurance kind of shoots down as well when you're holding your breath. And so being able to use your breathing to calm yourself down when you're coming back to center in between stuff,
Right.
use your breathing to help you, push through movements and stuff. It was interesting. And I think it's not something that most athletes are looking at, but I'm like,
Yeah.
any stone unturned, I think is valuable. But yeah, sorry not to
For
cut you
sure.
off there.
No, that's a good point. I would say looking into the breathing mechanics, PRI is kind of interesting. It kind of showed me a lot about that. I think there's this big thing where it's like, oh, yoga, you need to learn how to breathe well. And you'll see like this massive belly breathing. And that serves a specific purpose. But if you think about where your lungs are not in your belly. So like, yeah, the belly and the pelvic floor and the diaphragm will go down as you breathe in. But theoretically, if you're breathing well, you'll actually start to feel like length open up around the rib cage and up here rather than just a big bulge in the belly. So that has been really impactful, just like spending time, which is not super fun. But then once you kind of understand those principles of how to breathe into the rib cage, you can actually start to apply that into specific lifts or like positions in which you can like get into an isometric position. And if you want to create some length on one side, you can put your body in a position and then like direct air there. And then that's actually going to intensify the stretch. So pelvis, rib cage breathing, like that's another tip, but I get it. That I could talk about that for 8 hours, but
No, that's
no one wants to listen to that.
That's really cool. I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah,
Like, because I've competed in powerlifting before, and like learning how to brace correctly, which is kind of like
sure.
create that 360-degree
Yes.
pressure,
Yep.
the abdomen,
Mhm.
the rib cage is like it's actually one of the fastest ways to like increase your squat strength
For
if you don't
sure.
know how to do it.
Yeah,
But
you could do that.
it's like a skill.
Yeah, it is. Have you done that's a way we
The
teach that in
sandwich
program.
breathing.
Yeah, like where you put a little
Yep.
band around kind of like right under the sternum, and then you pull
Yep.
it around, wrap it, and you actually sense and you start to feel the band tighten around. That's a way to improve that proprioception. Like, oh, I actually feel now my skin's getting tight around the band. And then you're sending signals like, okay, that's good feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually so like when I'm helping coach someone on a squat, I watch because a lot of people make the mistake. They'll breathe in and then start to lower
Sure.
in the squat before they've actually like created that brace, created that stiffness
Yeah.
through that
Or
breathing.
maybe they're kind of faking that breath and then you'll just see the rib cage pop up like that.
Yep.
Um, but like you
Exactly.
kind of want to, I won't say lock it down, but you almost kind of want to keep the rib cage centered with a little light core engagement. And then if you can do that, if you can keep the ribs stacked over the pelvis, then you can actually direct air into that. But what happens is if you have the pelvis that dumps kind of anterior and then you have a rib flare, you're not really getting air up in there.
Yep. No, it's super true. That's really cool. I'll check out the PRI
Yeah, it's
breathing
cool.
stuff next time. I haven't seen that.
A common, I would say, what I see other people ragging on with PRI is like, okay, they'll spend time like blowing into a balloon and doing these weird positions up against the wall, which I think is helpful. And then I see people take PRI positions and then like actually add load to them. And that's cool. PRI's taught me and the application of it. I guess maybe like the third tip that I would have would be maybe starting to understand like the gait cycle of walking and running and what kind of happens with a little bit of rotation via the hips and the pelvis and what happens. And then try to start just incorporating some lifts in that are driving a little bit of um, rotation either way. So that's been really helpful for me, coming from just everything is bilateral, everything is CrossFit, everything is powerlifting, everything is bodybuilding focused. Like, okay, like I still love those things at heart, but how can I kind of start to now shift up my training a little bit that is hitting different positions that I know are good for me? Still getting a pump while
Awesome.
doing it.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap is on those tips. Do you have anything else for us, Ryan? Any more questions?
Yeah, I guess Cam, real quick, do you want to shout out a couple of things? Like anybody like
Yeah.
resonates with this stuff? Where can they find you and your guys' stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So, I would say like one thing too, if you are dealing with pain or injury and, Max, I think you're a great example of this. You're getting to moving and, you're not discouraged. You've obviously put in a ton of work and I'm sure you love it. Right. And you know that you can get back. I'd say people who are dealing with pain and injury and like don't feel like you have agency in the recovery, you absolutely do have agency, but that takes some work. It takes some responsibility and like stop icing and massaging for freaking months and like go do something about it, because I think people get trapped up in like, well, it's hurt for a while. And this one thing makes it feel better for the next 2 minutes. So like, I just need that relief and they don't pull back and be like, okay, where do I want to be in a month, 3 months, 6 months? So you have absolutely agency if you kind of take an active approach. In terms of our Instagram, I think that's, a good place for people to start is, it's Whealth. It's just WHEALTH. I would say that's probably a really good place to start. We have the website link there and whatnot. You can click on to, the website from there. My Instagram is, I think it's at Cam Borch, CAMBORCH. Yeah. And then Whealth or those two. And if you shoot a DM or you have any questions as well, typically one of us not typically, we do respond to those things as well.
Awesome,
Awesome.
Cam. Thank you, man. This has been
Thank
super
you.
insightful and super excited to look into more of this stuff. And yeah, thanks
Yeah,
for coming on.
absolutely. Hey, well, Max, good luck on the recovery. What about for you guys though? I know you guys got to run, but what are some of the goals for you guys leading up podcast, fitness?
Big and strong.
Yeah.
It's the first time I haven't been around wrestling in like not like I don't know 20 years. So now I
Wow.
feel like I haven't been constrained to a weight class.
you miss it? Are you excited now?
Yeah, I'll miss it. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
for sure.
I'll be around it in some
Yeah,
capacity.
definitely.
So yeah,
And what about
but
you,
Yeah,
Max?
just get healthy. And I think I've been focusing on powerlifting for the last couple of years. I think I'll take a little break from that to
Mhm.
get really healthy, focus on a lot more
Marathon.
mobility, strength. No marathon.
yep.
Awesome.
But maybe some like more bodybuilding type goals. Get
I
huge.
love it, guys. Hey, well, thanks for having me on. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hey, take care.
Thank you, Cam.
See ya.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bye.